Hi, we're going to talk about book lists now and reading and how to incorporate that. My toddler's throwing a tantrum in the background, so I apologize again in these moments. He's with my husband, so I'm assuming he's just working out his feelings. So hopefully you can relate. But if you can, we'll tune that out. It's hard to do. And we're going to focus on developing your reading elements for your program. Okay, so first of all, reading is going to be the backbone of all of your subject categories. Whether you decide to do that through print or audiobooks is up to you and your child, but reading is still the primary avenue of acquiring content, certainly of creating curiosity, of learning beyond the boundaries of our own experience. Literature, fiction, nonfiction, reference materials, all of them are amazing. So think broadly, think generously. You can never have too many books lying around. I feel like most of us have access to a wonderful public library. Take advantage of it. So a few points there. When you are acquiring books, you're probably going, if you've purchased a curriculum, they will have curated the books you read for you. So the pro of that is somebody's done the work for you. The con of that is somebody's curated your book lists for you. So we talk about the pitfalls of that in kind of the video that talks about some of the blind spots in homeschooling. But if that's what you've done, that's what you've done. You can probably skip this video unless you want to think about how to supplement reading. If you are building your own reading program, you're going to be thinking literature, history, and science as the primary components of reading, and then all your other subjects, how they overlap. We talked about overlapping in each of them. So for instance, if in history you are wanting to study the modern era, the last 100 years, then when you're looking for your science books in your thematic area of astronomy that you've decided to study, you're going to look for books talking about the scientific discoveries of the past 100 years in astronomy. You're going to maybe be looking at physics. You're going to maybe be doing some biographies of Albert Einstein and his way of thinking and how that contributed to our modern understanding of astronomy. So there's your overlap right there. It's going to give you some arrows for what kind of books you're going to be searching for. The internet has a lot of these lists. Other people have done the work for you, and you can pick and choose titles off them. Other resources like Susan Wise Bauer's The Well-Trained or Well-Educated Mind. Google, it's easy to find. I always mix it up. She has got in the end notes of each chapter tons of wonderful resources. There are Charlotte Mason book lists because it's a literature-based program. Or literature-based philosophy. There are Charlotte Mason book lists out there. There's tons of book lists. So you should be able to, with Google, come up with titles if you're having trouble finding titles. But you're going to think beyond reading skill. You want to get books in your home that are above your child's reading skill. That's going to challenge them. Maybe you're going to assign those, or maybe you're going to reserve them for read alouds or audiobooks, because you never want to underestimate your child. Like, they can, even very young ones can learn so much from books that they don't fully understand everything about. It'll increase their vocabulary, it'll increase their comprehension. And often, a lot of times, they're really drawn to it because they feel like they've really accomplished something to have done an extra challenging book. And I think you want to capitalize on that. It is a big accomplishment to challenge themselves with their reading. Of course, you want some at their reading level that you can hand to them and say, go read this book. And then you want some below their reading level. Again, don't underestimate what an older child can learn from a reference book designed for the younger grades. Don't underestimate their desire to fondly revisit Frog and Toad or some of these classics that they read as children, and that's wonderful and that's fine. So you're going to want to get a wide variety of books. Now, are you going to read every single one? Maybe, maybe not. Are you going to assign every single one? Maybe, maybe not. So when we talk about how to acquire them, in short, you are going to be a regular patron at your local public library so that you can have more books than you need. Out of your book lists, you're going to select a few that you are going to choose as read alouds, that you are going to or audiobooks if you're unable to read aloud. I try and do at least 1 or 2 read alouds. It's such a unique and beautiful part of homeschooling, and I don't think you'll regret the time. There'll be precious memories together. But if you can't, you're going to find some titles that are going to be audiobooks that your children are going to listen to. You're going to find some titles that you're going to assign to your child to read on their own, and then you'll check in with them and they'll maybe narrate the content back to you. You'll say, tell me something you learned in your reading today, just so you can kind of check in. Are they tracking? Are they actually doing the reading? Are they daydreaming? You know, that's kind of the way you evaluate as a homeschooling parent. You just check in to see, what did they learn from this, and am I satisfied with that? You know, you don't need the Q&A worksheet. You just need to hear that they learned some content, the content you were hoping for them to learn. And then you're going to have some below reading level. Maybe you'll assign, maybe not, maybe you'll just set them out. How we liked to do this was we liked to get a bunch of books and then have a designated bookshelf in the house, and there would be daily assigned reading and daily free reading. And so in the assigned reading time, maybe they'd have a specific book, or maybe they'd be free to choose from the curated bookshelf. And then there was free reading where they could choose comics, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Captain Underpants, the fun books. You want to cultivate a delight in reading that isn't necessarily always challenging or always, you know, correlated with your content. But it's kind of like finding that balance between nourishing food and junk food, and offering your children new foods and offering them what they're drawn to. So you kind of want that in their reading as well. So that's how we did it, and it worked very well because they had quite a bit of agency. Like if there were 5 books about astronomy on the shelf, they'd maybe be drawn to one over the other. And as far as I was concerned, all of them were general astronomy books. All of them were going to teach them the basic concepts. So really reserve the assigned books for the ones where you're like, no, this specific book, this specific story, this specific work of literature, this specific author, I want them to have that. But for the general ones, give them a wide selection and let them pick what they're drawn to. Okay, so that is think beyond reading skill. But, and this is this video I've done 2 takes on, and I can't remember if I've said this, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But you want to think of what Charlotte Mason, the great educational philosopher, says are twaddle-free books in your curated book lists. And that means not junk food books. So quality literature. It doesn't have to be on a list of classics, but it should be reputable. It should be challenging at some level. It should be recommended. These are the kind of books you want to put on your book lists. Okay. Also in this category, so you're going to find book lists in your subject areas. Again, do I have my good enough sheet? What happened to it? Oh, here it is on my lap. Good enough sheet in these subject areas. You're also going to include, and I don't think I talked about this in this take, history and social studies and literature, because you notice they don't have their own separate category, really because these ones are primarily going to be explored through literature, in my opinion. So if you've decided to study the modern era in history, you're really going to be looking for fiction, nonfiction, reference, biographies, all of this sort of all across the genres of modern historical figures and events. You may look for a textbook that fits in that, or a children's encyclopedia or a young person's encyclopedia that really is looking at modern history or World War I or something like this that's going to give you a more topical approach. And then if history and social studies do overlap, I would say the main distinction is social studies tends to be more topical and history tends to be more chronological, but they're all looking at global events, global cultures, how individuals and events shaped the world. So you may want a more chronological or topical focus, and you'll see those terms, social studies a little bit more in the classroom, history a little bit more in homeschool curriculum, but think about what what your approach is going to be, and use whichever term you find helpful. But in case you're wondering, why am I seeing those things? That's my interpretation of how they're used differently. But I think there's a lot of overlap there. And the same thing with classic literature. You may determine there are a few classic titles you really want your child to read. But other than that, you're willing to explore a lot on a book list. Like maybe you find a book list that says, these are great works of classic literature that are stories told centering around World War II. And maybe you haven't read any of them. Maybe you skim some reviews. Maybe you feel quite comfortable just stocking your shelf with a wide variety and letting your children choose a few. But you want to make sure that you have The Boy in the Striped Pajamas or Number of the Stars or these few select ones that they will read or that you'll read together. So that sort of thing. Okay. So think beyond reading skill, think thematically. So I kind of just touched on that. So you're going to think about how your themes overlap in your book list. And then you want to think globally and multiculturally. You want to have diverse bookshelves. I mean, we are realizing how much of a problem this has been in classroom education. Don't be deceived that it's not a problem in homeschooling education. It's maybe even more of a problem in homeschooling education because you're in your very own echo chamber. You're not even aware of your blind spots. So you are going to naturally gravitate toward the familiar, whether that's what you learned, the classics you read as a child, or the type of book lists in your little nook of homeschooling. And I want to really challenge you to challenge yourself to diversify your bookshelves and your book lists and your content. This is, again, another argument against boxed curriculum, in my opinion, because somebody's curating that for you, whereas you have the freedom to make sure you're following other homeschooling people on social media that look differently, that have different experiences, that have different philosophies than you do. And whether you do what they do or not, it's going to keep you from that echo chamber. You are going to give yourself a hard look. I had to do a hard look this summer as a white woman to say, what am I determining as classics? Like, have I been intentional about putting authors of color in front of my children, stories outside their experience, stories that aren't just, oh, this is a good story, but that are intentionally saying, we don't live in an urban environment. I want to give them stories that help them understand that and experience that. This is the beauty of literature. So don't be stuck. Don't fall for the trap that you're going to come across a lot, that Western European history is the backbone of history. Yes, it's important. Global history is important. So you don't want to alternate your years between 1 year we talk about Western European history and 1 year we talk about American history. That's predominantly white settler oriented. If you do that, you can. There are curriculums that lean that way. You're going to really underserve your children. So take a hard look at how broad of a selection you have in your curriculum and adjust it accordingly. Your book lists should make you a little bit uncomfortable with the ideas they might, especially if you have older children, you should feel a little bit uncomfortable that they're going to come across ideas that challenge them and challenge you. That would happen in the classroom. I'm a firm believer that it should happen in your home. And we talk about that in the pitfalls of homeschooling. So go outside your comfort zone, go outside what is familiar. Make sure you include plenty of things that you personally find delightful or you remember fondly as a child, but challenge yourself here so that you can really serve your children well. Also think outsourcing. If you are feeling intimidated by this, reach out to a children's librarian. Google is a wealth of information. But if you want specific questions, if you say, we're studying World War I and I don't know where to start, a children's librarian may have a handful of books that they can say these are really quality for the age range you're looking at. You can also reach out to Kidlit authors. As one myself, I love hearing from readers, and often they'll say, can you recommend books like yours? And I do know that because I like to read fantasy literature, I write fantasy literature, and I'm also aware of other Kidlit authors who write similar books. So you might not hear back from a New York Times bestseller, but Many Kidlit authors love hearing from readers and reply to them. So that's a great way to outsource. And then finally, think accessibility. Like, how are you going to get these books? As far as I know, most public library systems are offering curbside pickup at some of their locations. So find the nearest one and just plan that into your schedule, that you are going to be a regular curbside pickup person, and figure out the lag time. If you experiment with this a little bit, if you place a hold and are learning that it takes 2 weeks before your hold is fulfilled, you're just going to put a little calendar notation. If you think you're going to be starting school, mid-September, well, you're going to place your first hold order end of August, and then you can adjust. And every few weeks, you're going to place another hold. Or a couple weeks before you start a new content area in science, you're going to place your holds. And ideally, you would have selected most of your book lists in the summer. Now, when you're doing your planning, you will have starred the ones that are going to be required reading. So you make sure you get those. And then beyond that, when you go to place your hold, you're going to say, I just want a broad range of astronomy books because I want them to be on my shelf, and my child's going to pick whichever one they want to learn from. And if you don't know this, most libraries will let children register for library cards. So if you're worried about reaching the maximum amount of books, your partner, your children, anyone in your household can register for a card, and that can increase the amount of books you can check out at one time. The pitfall with that is, if you check out 50 books at once and you miss the due date, that's a lot of fines for one day, which, it's good to donate to your local library. So you can feel good about that. You are, getting an amazing service from this, but beware of that. If you have a lot of books out, it can be hard to keep track of the fines and the returns sometimes. Also, if you aren't aware of the Overdrive and Libby apps, most public libraries have both of those, and you can get ebooks and audiobooks just as downloads, and you can place holds on them so they can automatically, you can get an email saying your hold is ready, and it's a very simple way to get those resources. So look into that. And then finally, you can always purchase books. If you have a small budget, it's a great way to purchase ones you want to return to again and again, you want to use all year long, so you're not worried about due dates. Or if you have multiple age children, if you love it so much, you want your younger children to be able to return to it later on. Buying books allows authors to create more good books. It demonstrates to publishers the kind of books you hope to have more of. So, if you have a little bit of money to set aside, that's a great way to acquire books and fill your bookshelves in a way that'll serve you well this year, all year long. All right, I think that's all the things. That was a lot because books are an important piece of this. If you have specific questions, as always, ping me on this.